Okay, so here we go. We are going to do color grading and After Effects tonight. It's going to be a rip-roaring good time. All right, so I'm going to basically do the assignment as it was given. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out 10 seconds of the footage that I like. We're going to create a composition for each of those 10 seconds, and we're just going to push through how this assignment actually gets produced all the way to the end. We may not do all 5 shots. We might only do 3, depending on how much time we have. And I'll try to get you guys out here a little early or leave you some time to work or ask questions about other stuff you're working on later tonight. Sound good? Yeah. Excellent. All right, so we're going to bring in the sample footage. And then I'm also going to bring in kind of the finished product to show you guys. All right, so here is the 5 shots that I did that I set up for this project, shown basically the way that I would expect your assignment to be shown. So here we go. I'm just going to play through this real quick. So you can see the original footage, you can see the grade wipe on and complete across the screen for each of the 5 shots. And you can use different ways to bring these effects in and out as you please. They don't all have to be mask wipes. You can fade stuff on. And that's it. There we go. So pretty straightforward. All right, so let's get started. I'm just going to kind of look through a couple of these real quick. I think the one that I really like to start with is the CR_10. So it's kind of the city shot. So let's take CR_10 and drop it in a new composition. And it looks like this shot's only 8 seconds long. That's fine. If your assignments are a little shorter than 60 or a little longer, I don't really care. Just make sure the grades are good and that we can really see the difference in what you're doing. All right, so here we go. We have this city footage. We'll scrub through it a little bit. It's shot pretty nicely. There's no real like super duper bright spots in this that might be overexposed. There might be a little overexposure on this guy's hat right here, but we got good blacks to work with, good whites. Everything looks good. We're gonna go in here and we're gonna embellish this shot a little bit, make it look nicer. All right, so the one thing that I want you guys to take away from today is the really great, powerful tool that they have inside of After Effects called SA Color Finesse. It's a built-in color corrector inside of After Effects. It's kind of like Mocha. It's built by Synthetic Aperture, and it's got all these great tools that you can use to color grade your stuff. So let's go ahead and open that up first and foremost. It can be a little bit tricky to open up, so let's just make sure that everything's going to work correctly. If you guys get any funky stuff that shows up, like if it comes up like watermarks or bars on it or anything like that, you might need to shut down and restart, open up, and try one more time. So you're going to drop SA Color Finesse on your footage just like you would any other effect. And then what you want to do is you want to open the full interface. So up here where it says Color Finesse 3, you want to click on Full Interface, and it should open up the interface for you to work in. And this is what it looks like.
Please enter your name.
Okay, if it's set, give me 1 second. So don't do anything. If you get a little screen that says enter whatever.
I just put BS and then it'll be used it. I just type random.
BS, okay, put BS in there and then click confirm, right? Or register.
And then say no once it says would you like to register now.
And then when it says if you like to register, say no. Does it work? Did it work for everyone? Yeah. All right, good. Okay, so this is the Color Finesse full interface UI, and you've got a whole lot of tools in here. So you've got all of your kind of reference tools on the upper left-hand corner. So that's your IRE scale, which is 0 to 100 IRE. Don't ask me what IRE means off the top of my head because I don't remember. Institute of Radiological Electricians or something like that. It's basically a scale of the strength of the signal, right? So 0 would be black, 100 would be white. Generally, when you're color grading for broadcast, you want things to fall within a certain IRE level. I don't really do much of that anymore. Even when we were doing stuff for broadcast for Care, I would just balance my footage from 0 to 100 and try to make the whites nice and bright, up there near 100, not going over if I can help it, and then the darks or the blacks nice and low, down there near 0, and so that they don't peak or crush depending on the look that you're going for. So we have the IRE scale, we have the histogram that basically breaks out cyan, magenta, yellow, black, or cyan, magenta, green, yellow, blue, red, all the basic colors of the video spectrum, which is over here. So you guys know the color bars, right? Yeah. So back in the day, what they would use color bars for is to balance their cameras, and they would use this vector scope to balance the cameras. Do you guys use vector scope over in the studio to balance your cameras? No? Okay, so back in the day, I know this is super stupid, but back in the day what you would do is you would actually like turn the dials on the camera controllers to get all of those color bars in the color bars to line up with all these little spots, right? So you'd put the color bars in front of the camera, and then you'd basically control all the different color levels of the camera to get these little dots to fit right into these little boxes of the vector scope. And then you'd know that all of your cameras were perfectly balanced. All the blues would match, all the yellows would match, cyan, magenta, all those colors would all match. So if you ever throw color bars up in front of your camera, you can actually use the vector scope to kind of match up all the colors. So that's one nice reason to actually shoot color bars, or to shoot a chip chart when you're shooting your cameras, right? Because you can use those chip charts to balance all your colors out. This scale in the lower left-hand corner, I think it's the tone curve. So it kind of shows you what you're doing with curves, if you're using curves to adjust anything with your footage. And then you've got luminance, your red, green, and blue values as well. And it gives you all kinds of information to work with. The one reference that I really like to use is the overlay waveform. This is basically the IRE scale with red, green, blue, all laid over each other so that you can see kind of where your colors are, right? And I like this one because if there's areas of white inside of the image, you can use this to kind of balance things out to make sure that your whites are true white, which is really nice. Did you have a question, David?
So when it's just a Luma waveform, is that just the combination of RGB and just them added together?
Right.
Okay.
So, well, the Luma waveform, like when you're looking at this one, or when you're looking at just the Luma waveform. So the Luma waveform is just luminance.
Okay.
So you've got, let me see if I can remember all this crap. I think it's luminance, chrominance, and there's one more.
So it's different than just
Anybody
RGB.
remember? Luminance, chrominance, and I can't remember. That's terrible. I'm a teacher too. I didn't study this. Like the last time I studied this was when I was taking this course, which was over 10 years ago. So some of this stuff is still relevant if you work in a broadcast world. Like if you're working at like a Care 11 or whatever, and you're setting all your cameras up to shoot for broadcast every night, this stuff does matter. If you're shooting to go to the web, it matters a lot less. If you're shooting to go to broadcast on television, you probably need to make sure that things aren't like, you don't have anything that's over 100 IRE, because you used to be able to actually spike a signal. So if you had footage that was over 100 IRE, it would cause problems in the processing of the signals. But now everything is all computer controlled. They have all this advanced stuff that will basically, like, if there's a color that's not within spectrum, it'll just knock it back automatically. So you don't have to worry about too much of that anymore. But it's still a good idea to make sure everything kind of falls within a nice color range. All right, so the one I like the most is the overlay. I kind of told you why. Gives you kind of the ability to look at what you have and kind of adjust and balance your colors out to make sure things look nice. This shot's going to be a little bit tricky because we got a lot of different kind of colors of white in here. Like over on this guy's hat, you can see that he's got this kind of spike of white. But in the areas where it's a little darker, it kind of falls off the blue, right? The same with these colors up here in the middle of the image. You can see that those kind of fall off to blue as well. So there's a lot of different kind of tonalities happening here. So we're going to want to kind of come in here, color correct this a little bit to try to make those whites look a little bit whiter. And then we'll do some fun stuff with kind of grading the image. All right, so I'm going to kind of use the overlay waveform reference, and we're going to just kind of come in here and start making adjustments. So generally when I'm working inside of Color Finesse, the way that I work is I'll set my my reference monitor up, which is my overlay waveform, and sometimes I'll move between the different options that I have, like move from combo back to waveform overlay. Over here on the right hand side, you can see your result, which is what happens when you start playing around with sliders and moving stuff. And you can see your source, excuse me. And you can also, if you want to, use a reference image. I won't really get too much into reference images because it's kind of convoluted the way that it works. You have to actually export like a JPEG of a frame and then have it reference that JPEG, and then you match to the JPEG. So it really isn't the best for doing referencing between multiple shots, but you can make it work if you really want to. Split source is a good one to use too. So this allows you to look at any changes that you've made to the image and see what you have from the before and the after. So if you say brighten this image way up, you can see that it splits the image, so you can see what the final version is, and you can see the original version as well. Stay with me, Damien. Come on, buddy.
You don't know Damien.
Stay with me, buddy. All right. So let's start playing around with color here a little bit. So what we're going to try to do here is we're obviously going to try to get a little bit more dark out of this because the blacks are pretty light, and we want to bring the whites down a little bit and kind of balance the shot out a little bit and make it look a little more natural. Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Can you explain the difference between brightness and exposure?
Brightness and exposure.
Yeah.
So brightness is basically like just the white value, right?
Okay.
Exposure, I think, is more like an algorithm to make it act more like overexposing or like camera exposure, right? You can really see the difference when you do it in After Effects proper. Like if you use hue, saturation, brightness, and then use exposure, they have kind of a different way that they affect the image. How exactly they do that is all determinant upon like the algorithm, but brightness is really just taking a base look at the image and saying everything gets brighter, right? Where exposure will actually overexpose per color. So like if you say overexpose your footage or use exposure on your footage, it's going to look more like you overexposed it rather than just added white to it, right?
Okay. Do you add a lot of grain with both of them, or?
You shouldn't be seeing too much grain. I mean, the grain is going to be in your footage, right? So if you shoot, let's say at 3200 ISO, right? And then you oh crap, I shot it way too dark. Now I need to go in and pump it way up. Well, then the grain is really going to play because all of your darks are carrying that grain. If you push the darks way up, you're going to see that grain is going to become a lot more prominent in your image. All right, so let's start playing around with this a little bit. So I feel like this is a little bit on the blue side. So where I'm going to kind of start here is I'm going to start with the hue offsets, right? So on each of these little tabs in the lower left-hand corner, you got hue, saturation, and lightness. You've got RGB, which is red, green, and blue. You've got CMY, you got luminance, chrominance, and the other thing that I can't remember. And then you've got curves, levels, luma range, secondaries, and limiting. I don't really ever use limiting. This is what I was talking about when I said, like, if you have colors or exposure that's over 100 IRE, you can use things like limiting to just cut certain things off at a certain IRE level. So, like, if you wanted to make sure nothing went above 90 IRE, you could use limiting to set that up. We're not really going to play around with limiting too much. So mainly what I work in when I'm working in SA Color Finesse is hue, saturation, lightness. RGB, CMY, and YC, CB, CR do basically the same thing but in a different way. So hue, saturation, lightness, and then let's go into the hue offsets. So the hue offsets is going to kind of be familiar, right? If you've worked in Lumetri inside of Premiere, you probably are used to seeing some color wheels in there to kind of move colors around in certain areas of the image, right? So that would be in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So I'm going to start with kind of a master color grade. I'm just going to start to pull some of the blues out of this a little bit and try to get the whites to move over to a little more warm, natural color, right? So I'm just going to start there. I'm just going to grab this little dot in the middle and kind of move it up and to the left, and you're going to see the shot kind of starts to balance out right away. And also pay attention to what's happening in the waveform overlay. So you see how in the waveform overlay, you've got the blue sections kind of like moving down now, right? So the blues are getting more saturated, or less saturated, I'm sorry, and the reds are moving up in the IRE level. So you can tell that your image is getting a little more warm.
So it's saturation, it's not brightness that waveform is telling you?
It's a base, like the master is controlling the color overlay of the whole image, right? So it's controlling shadows, midtones, and highlights. If we want to, we could go in and we could split this up, right? So let's say I wanted to give my highlights a really warm look. I could take the highlights and move it up to the orange area, right? And now I want to give my shadows like a really weird green look. And I could take my shadows and move them down to a green area.
So like when you see on the waveform, like the blue go down, does
Yep.
that mean the blue is becoming darker?
Darker,
Okay.
correct. Yep. Go ahead, Luke.
Are you just doing? Well, I see on the master color wheel, you're kind of doing the opposite of what blue is.
Correct.
And that applies true if it was like pink footage.
Exactly.
You would do green. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. If you use like a lot of lenses will leave a color cast on your footage, right? So if you're shooting stuff, like get really detailed when you're looking at the footage. Like look at what what footage looks like shot on an 80 millimeter versus a 35, because some lenses have a color cast to them. I know like my 70 to 200 Canon leaves things a little bit more green than like my 85 millimeter Canon does. So if I'm color grading footage that's from the 85, I need to pull a little bit more green out of it to get the two to match. This is another interesting thing, like who's in 3D? So you guys that are in 3D, you know that when you start working in 3D, you start looking at the world in a different way, right? Like you start thinking about like, ooh, I could make that material and that material. Like you're walking around looking outside going, oh, that's brick. I could do that this way in 3D, right? Color grading is kind of the same thing. When you start really getting into color grading, you start looking at colors in the world and looking at your footage in a whole new way. Do you guys do that, or am I just weird?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just weird. All right, so when I took 3D, that's how I started looking at the world. Like I started like thinking about how could I model that tower over there? How could I apply this weird material that's got shiny spots and rough spots? Like I started thinking about looking at the world in a totally different way, and I do that the same with color grading too. Like when I'm looking at things in the real world, like, oh, that's really cool. Like if I were to color grade that this way, it would be really interesting. So you're going to start seeing things in a different way, which is really fun about working in video. All right, here we go. So let's play with kind of balancing this out a little bit. All right, so like I said, this has got kind of a blue cast to it. So I'm going to kind of take this master and I'm just going to try to pull some of the blue out of this. And like Luke said, we're just basically moving the opposite direction of blue, right? So we're trying to pull a little blue out and put a little warm into it and get those whites to kind of be proper white. It's looking all right. And in some cases, you might want to push certain areas a little further. So I'm over here in the highlights as well, just kind of playing with the highlights. I'm basically looking up here in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of eyeballing this right now. I'm not like going in with a color picker and saying, this is what I want to be white. And you can do that with Lumetri, and that's totally fair game. We'll look at Lumetri a little bit too, as well as Color Finesse. All right, so I kind of balance things out a little bit. To me, the darks now look like they're a little bit orange, so I'm gonna actually put a little bit back, a little bit of blue back into those darks and just try to balance the shot out a little bit more. And then let's look at the split ref and we can see the difference between what we started with and what we have now. So you can see as I kind of scrub this back and forth, it's kind of warmed the image up a little bit. The whites are a little bit better balanced. And I'm on the right track. The other thing just to know about color grading is it's super duper subjective, right? So if you guys like the blue of the image and you want to push it cooler, that's totally up to you. I mean, maybe you're telling a story that's really dark and cold, and I want this to feel dark and cold. Well, you go in and make it feel dark and cold. Blue's a cold color, so if you make something blue, it's going to feel colder to the viewer. And you see that a lot in films these days, where they'll just like color cast the crap out of something. Like, who here's seen Mad Max? Okay, so you know all the stuff that they shot at night, or that was supposed to be night, was shot day for night, right? And they just put this massive blue color cast over it to make it look like it was nighttime. It's all fair game. It's all subjective. So do whatever you guys feel is right. All right, so I've kind of corrected this a little bit, kind of making the whites get a little bit closer to the actual white point. The other thing you guys can kind of look for is you can take your highlight point and move it around just a little bit and use it. So like this hat right here is the kind of the brightest white thing in the whole image, right? And so what I'm looking at is this section of the IRE scale right over here. And I'm kind of trying to take the highlights and make that white hat pure white. And here's how I'm doing that. All right, I'm gonna make another little adjustment here. I'm just gonna pull the whole image down a little bit, right? So I'm gonna take the pedestal and I'm gonna pedestal the image down. And what I'm looking at here is I'm just trying to bring the darkest spots of the image down to 0 and give myself a little bit more space on the brighter parts of the image so that I can see how much color are in those spots. All right, so I'm back to my hue offsets here, and I'm just going to play around with these just a little bit. And you'll notice this is that hat right there, right? So the hat, when we looked at the source, you couldn't even really tell it because it was all crushed out on the top. But after I pedestaled this down a little bit, you can see that it brings a little bit of detail back into the hat. And you can also see that parts of that hat fall off to blue, right? So that little blue swish right there is this part of the hat that's kind of falling off to blue. But it's kind of balanced out, right? So I took the highlights and I'm kind of using that white hat to balance out the whites in the image. The other thing to just note is like you've got these other areas of white, right? Like this building in the background is this big honking splotch of white, which is over here on the left-hand side of the image. And you can see that that's kind of fallen off the blue as well. So this is all kind of like, again, subjective. Like, what do I want white to actually be? Do I want it to be white, or do I want it to be blue or yellow or red or orange or magenta or whatever color you want it to be, right? So here's the source. Here's the result. Will it help to shut this thing off so you guys can actually see? All right, so the source again, the result. You can see it's warmed up a little bit. I'm going to try the same thing with the darker areas of the image. You can see that in the histogram we got blues kind of a little bit stronger now, and I'm just going to try to balance the blacks out as well. And that's looking pretty good. All right, so now let's look at the histogram here real quick too. All right, so you can see on the histograms on the Luma, we've got a little bit of space at the top of the histogram and a little bit of space at the bottom of the histogram. So when you're shooting, that's basically what you would be going for, is you'd want a nice balanced image, try to keep your whites inside 100 IRE, and try to keep the darks up above 0, right? You don't want to spike anything out if you can help it. Sometimes you can't help it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to just take that histogram and we're going to stretch it out just a little bit. So I'm going to go from hue, saturation, lightness down to levels, and I'm just going to use the level control to kind of pull the image histo all the way down to 0. So I'm just basically trying to work the footage just a little bit so that we get maximum bright whites and nice dark darks. And let's take a look at our source and our result one more time. Sweet, it's looking pretty good. All right, so this I would call kind of a corrected shot. We kind of took out the blue cast, kind of made the white look more white, and it's got a more natural look to it now. Now is where we can kind of play with it and grade it. So let's go ahead and click OK. Once you guys kind of got your shot balanced out the best you can, go ahead and click OK, and we'll start playing around with the actual grade. All right, so we have the color finesse is done, and now we want to play with the grade. So who here has seen Top Gear? The show Top Gear.
UK version, right?
UK version.
There we go.
So I love Top Gear because they just go nuts with their color grading. Like, their color grading is insane. Like, they do all kinds of crazy stuff to their footage to make it look out of this world, right? They do gradients and they do all kinds of fun stuff to their footage to make it look cool. So we're going to kind of take a Top Gear approach to this shot and really kind of stylize it in a fun way and use some color overlays to make it look more interesting. All right, so that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the footage So I'm just hitting Command D on the original footage, and I'm going to go ahead and add fast blur to the footage. And I'm going to blur this out just a little bit, 10 to 15 pixels. I'm going to have it repeat the edge pixels so that we got edge-to-edge blur going on. And then I'm going to kind of create a vignette around this footage. So the way I'm going to create a vignette is pretty easy. So I'm going to go up to the rectangle tool, click and hold, and I'm going to go down to the ellipse tool. And I'm just going to double click the ellipse tool, and it gives us a perfect ellipsed mask inside of our footage. And then I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to feather it a little bit. So we're just going to get this nice kind of soft edging around the footage. Might push the blur a little more, back this off just a little bit, and maybe even just pull out a little bit of the opacity so it's nice and subtle. So here's kind of the before and after. You can see it just gives us a nice little kind of Vaseline on the lens type of look around the edges.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah.
how do you invert the ellipse?
So you're in your mask, and I just clicked the invert checkbox next to the mask, and it inverts it. All right, so we added a nice little faded kind of blur at the edges. You can pull that in or move it out or whatever you want to do to kind of like stylize it a little bit more. I'm going to kind of expand the edges in a little bit so I get a little bit more of that effect so it's not so cut off in the corners. And here's kind of the before and after. You can see that blur taking effect. Looking pretty nice. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a color overlay on the top of this image to kind of help draw the eye to the bottom, but give it a little bit of a color stylistic look. So that's going to be simple. We're just going to go to Layer, New, Solid, and I'm going to pick a color from the image. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the color picker, and I'm going to pick the red on that Rix sign in the back. And that's going to be my red. So I have this big red solid right now. And then I'm going to start playing with some blending modes. So I'm going to try soft light first. And that's kind of nice. Try overlay. It's a little more rich. Probably going to go with one of those two. I'll start with soft light, and then I'm going to kind of do some masking to kind of mask this off and put the color right where I want it. So I'm backing out of the image a little bit, and then I'm going to come in here with the pen tool. And I'm going to create a nice mask that kind of runs across the footage like so, to kind of give me this cropped red spot in the upper left hand corner. And I'm going to go in and do the same kind of thing that I did with the ellipse mask on the bottom. I'm going to feather that out so it's a little bit more subtle. And I might make this a little more intense and maybe just pull out a little bit of the image with opacity, and then we kind of get a nice...
What did you make more intense?
So I changed the blending mode from soft light to overlay, because the overlay is a little more hot, intense.
Is there a way, like, besides opacity to like strengthen or weaken like blend modes or whatever, or like to adjust?
Yes, they work on lightness of color, right? So if I say go in here and go to the solid settings and then play around with the base color, let's say we pull a lot of it out, right? So these blending modes work on black and white, right? That's pretty much what they all work on, except for the ones down at the bottom, like the difference. The ones down at the very bottom of the list, those work a little differently. But the ones, I'm just gonna click OK here a couple times if I can make this work. So all these at the top, darken, multiply, color burn, classic color, those work on the dark parts of the image. I think these do as well. And no, ads work on the whites, and these kind of work on the whites as well. And then these all down on the bottom use different, like, they work on color, hue, saturation. They all have kind of different, they all kind of work in different ways, right? But the ones in the top bracket work on the darks, the ones in these two work on kind of light areas, and then these all kind of work in different ways as well. So that's got definitely a crazy different look to it when I use that saturation blending mode. And that's basically working off of the input saturation from the layer, right? So I'm not sure if I'm right on this, but I think I could pretty much use whatever color and it would give me basically the same look, right? Because it's working on the saturation in the image, not the actual color. All right, so I'm going to go back to overlay. I got a little more rich red, which is fine. But yes, you can use the color, the lightness and darkness of the color to kind of control how intense those looks are. I'm going to just pull a little bit of this out with the opacity. And then what I want to do is I want to bring in the original footage one more time. I probably should have just duplicated that right away, but I'm going to bring in the original footage and put it right on top so I can see the difference between what I started with and what I ended with. Let's do just a couple other little things to this just to kick it off. So one thing that I like to do is maybe add a little bit of sharpness into the image. And for that I use the unsharp mask. So I'm going to throw that on the very bottom layer. So that's the layer that is the main footage, right? The blur has got a little bit of transparency to it so you can see through it. We don't really need to sharpen the red overlay. That's not really going to do anything. So I'm going to add the unsharpened mask to the base footage, and I'm just going to push the amount a little bit so that it pops a little bit more. And here's kind of what it looks like. You can kind of see that the white areas become a little bit more crisp where those kind of like bars are on that deck right there. You can really see those start to pop out when you use the unsharpened mask. Unsharp mask is one of those things that you really want to kind of make sure you're subtle with. If you overdo it, it's going to make things look really weird. Like here, I'll just crank this way up. It basically just looks like a bad sharpening filter that was added by a camera, right? Like, looks like garbage. So a little goes a long way, in my opinion, with the unsharpened mask. All right, so again, we'll look at the before and after one more time. I don't know. I know that it works in kind of a weird way in that it kind of looks at adjacent pixels and kind of pulls things together, but I have no idea why they titled it unsharp mask. It would sound like it would be like a blur. All right, so we got a nice kind of before and after going on here, and now's the point where we kind of want to create some animation of the different effects that we've laid over our footage so you can see the before and the after and then the finished completed image. How many of you in here are just totally comfortable with animating masks? Good. All right, then this will be super easy for you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a simple wipe, right? So we're going to create a wipe with a mask so that you can learn a little bit more about animating masks. If you don't want to animate the masks, there are built-in wipes inside of After Effects. So if you go and you type wipe in, you can see that in the transition section there's all kinds of different wipes that you can use. So if you just want to use a standard like a linear wipe, you can throw that on the footage and basically animate the transition from beginning to end. So if I go to the beginning and I look at my transition, you can see that there is a wipe generated just when I drop that wipe on there. So if I wanted this to say wipe off over time, say over 2 seconds, and I have this soloed right now, I'm sorry about that. You can see that the footage starts on and then wipes off. You can also control the angle of the wipe, which is kind of nice. So if you wanted to bring it in bring it in from the other direction, you just control that angle, and then the wipe is moving left to right instead of right to left, or vice versa. So if you don't want to animate masks, that's a good way to create the transitions for all the different layers that you're working on. I'm going to just go ahead and animate the mask. It's something that I think everybody should get comfortable with. You're all going to want to know how to animate masks, kind of control them, and make them do what you want them to do. So I'm going to delete the wipe, and I'm going to create basically the same thing we just created, but with an animated mask instead. All right, so we have the footage that we want to create a wipe on. I'm going to go ahead and use kind of the same workflow that I used for creating the vignette or the blurred ellipse. So I'm going to go up to the ellipse tool, click and hold, and go to the rectangle tool. And then I'm just going to double click the rectangle tool. And what that does is it creates a perfect rectangle mask around my footage that I can now animate. I did solo the footage just so that I can see exactly what's happening with the mask really easily and I can control it. So obviously what we want to do is we want to draw this mask off, right? So we're seeing the footage that we want to see at the beginning right now, and we want to draw this mask off the screen. So here we go. We're going to make that happen. So you have the mask set up. Go into the mask parameters. Make sure you set a keyframe at 0 for the mask path. And then I'm going to have this wipe off over the course of 2 seconds. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can take the whole mask and move the whole mask off the screen, left, right, up, and down, whatever you want to do. Or you can grab a segment of it and move just a section of it if you want to do it that way. If, say, you just wanted to move the section, Luke is nodding his head yes, we want to see you just move the one section. I'm going to go ahead and select the 2 points that I want to control. And I'm going to take those and I'm holding the shift key. I'm going to grab the line and hold the shift key. That'll make it so that the mask kind of snaps to 90 degrees. If I don't hold the shift key, it can move all over and do funky stuff. So I'm just going to hold the shift key and slide this over to the right hand side, and it will create a nice linear wipe for me. I'm going to go ahead and add some ease in and ease out. And now I have a nice eased transition, and it's looking good. So the other thing that I'm going to do here, and because we don't see the footage after it's wiped off the screen, is I'm going to cut the footage at the mask. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click Alt, right bracket, to cut the footage so that the footage is no longer visible in any way, shape, or form on the screen once it's supposed to be wiped off. 2 reasons for doing that. Number 1, After Effects renders every single layer that is visible, right? So if you have a bunch of layers that are set up on the screen and none of them are actually visible, but the bar is where the current time indicator is, After Effects looks at that layer when it renders. So it basically increases the time that it takes to render. If you multiply that by hundreds and hundreds of layers, you're basically adding a bunch of render time that you didn't need to have there. Go ahead, Luke.
Hey Todd, how do we get rid of this pink grid that everyone has on their screens?
Oh, that would be the watermark from SA Color Finesse. So save what you have,
Oh no.
and then I think you either need to reapply SA Color Finesse or you need to exit and come back in. And when you did the registration, you should have canceled when it said send the registration. So that's what I was saying when it can do some funky stuff. Just roll with it for right now. We'll work through it. All right, so I'm going to cut the layer short, save myself some render cycles down the way, and we'll make sure that we don't have any like little slivers or anything like that on the right or left-hand side of the screen from animating the mask. All right, so we got one effect pretty much rendered and ready to go, or set up and ready to go, wipes the whole image on. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the red overlay, the blur, and the base footage, right? So I kind of want to build this progressively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take the red overlay and I'm just going to move this to the side. I'm going to have it come in at like 5 seconds, and we'll create some transitions for each of these. And then I'm going to take the blurred imagery and I'm going to have that kind of come in at like, we'll go 3.15, and I think I'm going to move my red overlay over just a little bit. I do want to be able to see the fully finished product for just a couple seconds so that I got some time to soak it up. So you don't want these things to happen too fast or too slow.
Why don't my keyframes keep disappearing when I do the right bracket?
It's Option right bracket. So that's how you cut the footage. All right, so I'm going to create some transitions for these other things. I'm just going to do some simple ones on the blur. I'm just going to go ahead and do a transparency transition. So I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to have this kind of draw on quickly so we can see the difference. And I'm going to have my opacity go from 0 to 60%. We'll see the blur come in, and then let's go ahead and do, we'll do just a standard, let's do a clock wipe like old school Star Wars for the red at the top of the screen. Voila. So playing this back, you can kind of see all the effects come in over time. And that is kind of the gist of this whole assignment. All right, so let's move on to one of the other shots, and we'll work with Lumetri this time instead of SA Color Finesse. All right, so if I were setting this project up, I need 6 10-second shots. What would I need to make that happen?
6 10-second shots.
There you go.
Good. What else do I need?
A camera. Computer.
Yes, you do need all those things. I'm talking about specifically inside of After Effects. Where do I need to put all of these shots?
Composition.
In a composition, right? So let's make a composition that we can dump all these finished shots into. And we'll call this last name underscore first name underscore week 14, because that is what we are going to render out at the end. I'm going to set it to 1 minute. At 1920 by 1080 at 23976. I'm not going to be a stickler about frame rates and all that crap. Do whatever you want. All right, so we have, I'm going to kind of separate and do a little bit of organization here too. I'm going to create a shot 1 folder, and I'm going to put my CR10 in there. And I'll probably do that with the rest of the shots as we go through. So I'm going to take CR10, which is now shot 1, and I'm going to put it on my timeline at the beginning. So I've got the first piece of this done. All right. Moving right along, let's see, what else should we have some fun with here? Let's do shot number 4 next. So we'll go into shot number 4. We're going to do kind of the same thing we did before. This is 19 seconds long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the footage, and I'm going to pick 10 seconds that I like. So I'm basically just going to use like the first 10 seconds. I really don't like this part where it bobbles right here. So I think I'm only going to use 7 seconds of this. It's fine. So the first 7 seconds, I'm going to take then the number 4 and drop it into a new composition using a little composition icon inside the project window. And that will create the footage for the next shot. All right, how we all doing? Everybody with me? This stuff is easy now, right? Lightweight now. What was that, Joe?
How did you do the in-point and out-point?
Okay, so I double-click the footage,
Yeah.
right? And then you can see the in and the out right here, set in and set out. There's probably a hotkey for this, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It's not I and O like you would expect from Premiere. So I just click the buttons. I wonder if they fixed this yet. Nope. Why would they fix any of the dumb crap that they've had in After Effects for the last decade? So one of the stupid things about the ins and the outs inside of After Effects is if you want to, say, go into the same chunk of footage and pick a different in and out for a different piece of video that you want to add as a new layer, if you say scrub further down the timeline and push the in key, it doesn't actually put the in there. Whereas in like Premiere, if you do that, it moves the in and the out to where you just push the in key and then you can set your out, right? Well, After Effects, they haven't updated that crap yet. So maybe we should all write them letters and say, hey, why don't you update the in and out points inside of After Effects to work like the ones in Premiere? That would be smart. All right, so if you want to pick a different section of the footage, what you have to do is push the out point first, then the in point, and then you can set the out point. All right. You got it, Joe? You good?
Yep.
All right. So we'll set this back up, 7 seconds. Everything's all good. Okay, cool. Okay, so here we've got some footage. This is looking pretty good. Got plenty of detail in it. Its colors are a little desaturated. This is going to work really nice for us to work with. All right, so now we're going to use Lumetri. So Lumetri works a little bit different than it does in Premiere. So let's go ahead and type in Lumetri. And you're looking specifically for Lumetri color. So let's go ahead and add Lumetri color to our footage. So Lumetri is nice. It's got a lot of nice little features to it. You can work in high dynamic range with it. That's something that I would be interested in playing with a little bit more. I haven't really learned much about it yet, but I would definitely like to learn. Lumetri.
Oh, PRI?
Just type in Luma, Lume, and it should be the first thing on the list.
Could it be Lumi?
Lume?
Luma would be MA, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, geometry.
That's a good point,
Right?
yeah.
All right, so Lumetri's got all kinds of fun things. Specifically, the thing I like the most about Lumetri is the ability to white balance select. That's really, really nice. So as long as you've got something in your image that is white, you can just go ahead and use that white balance selector to pick it, and it will white balance your footage, which is really, really handy. I wish Color Finesse would update their crap and add something like that to it, because they've got all the scopes and everything that you can work with, whereas when you're working with Lumetri, you really don't have those scopes. I think, however, we can go to the color parameter, the color setup, and it will give us some Lumetri scopes to work with. So did you guys all see how I did that? So if you click this little double arrow right here in the upper right hand corner, it's got a few different palette layouts for you. If you click on color, it'll give you the Lumetri scopes to work with. And I believe you can come in here and, oh, it doesn't give you any options. Boo. What about, okay, good. Yeah, you can right click on these and you can see different options. So if you want to add more scopes, you can add more scopes, kind of like we had inside of SA Color Finesse. Or you can get rid of scopes by just unchecking them. It's kind of weird that they put the histogram vertical instead of horizontal. All right, so you can see right away that we have kind of peaked data on the right-hand side. So there are full 255 darks in this, full 255 whites and full double or triple zero darks in this as well. So this shot doesn't really have a lot of latitude in it. We just will work around that. It's fine. It probably won't break the footage, but this is definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're shooting. All right, so we have some scopes to work with here. We can kind of work on balancing this shot if we want to. I'm going to go ahead and look at my waveform. I'm going to turn off the histo for right now. What the hell? Okay. All right, and it looks like in terms of like the dark areas of the image, there's only a couple spots that are fully black. You can see that most of the dark areas of the image are still sitting above 10 IRE, and most of the light areas of the image are still sitting at about 90 IRE. The overexposed portions seem to be these little blops of white on these roofs right here. Okay, so let's play around a little bit with this shot inside Lumetri. So Lumetri is kind of laid out pretty simply. You've got your basic corrections, which give you exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, which are really great tools to work with. You got some saturation to work with here as well. The one thing I kind of don't like about Lumetri is it caps your saturation off at 300. You probably will never have to go above that. Didn't they previously cap it at 200? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they previously capped it in 200. And when you're working with flat footage, 200 is not enough. Like, you need more. Probably.
Flat footage is a bad thing.
You can just duplicate the layer, though. So it's not
Yeah, you can, but it kind of sucks that you have to go in and duplicate it. They should just make it so that you can go up to like 1,000.
Yeah.
Like, you can just make the colors just look completely cartoony if you want to. All right, so let's see. They've got the creative section, which is where you can kind of play with the shadow and highlight tints and some different weird things like faded film, sharpen, vibrant, saturation. Again, so if we go 300 here, or sorry, 100 there, 300 here, and another. Oh, good, we can make it look cartoony. We just got to add that creative look saturation in there, and we can make it look completely ridiculous. And then you've got your curves adjustment, which is really nice if you want to, say, pop the lights and pull the darks in a little bit, create that classic S-curve look. You can do that in curves. That's kind of nice. Go ahead. Can I reset that easily? No. Oh, what else do we have to play with? The color wheels, which are very much like what we saw inside of SA Color Finesse, which allowed you to kind of control the highlights, midtones, and shadows. What happens if you turn high dynamic range on? Ah, yes, set your project bit depth to 32 bits per channel. It's too bad we don't have any HDR displays to look at. It would be fun to play with that stuff. Cool. Did you guys hear they just released a new HDR computer monitor that has 1,000 nits of brightness? Ooh.
No, not that. You're not talking about that.
No, it's an actual computer monitor now. I think it's like a 43-inch computer monitor by, I want to say it's Panasonic, but I'm probably wrong.
What is it?
Ridiculously expensive.
The one that's like $18,000.
Yeah, it's crazy expensive.
It's meant for like directors in the field to like watch, right?
No, it's not a field monitor. It's like a computer monitor. It might not be $18,000.
I did see some monitors that were like $20,000. It was like crazy.
Who's got this thing? I'm trying to remember who's got. Yeah, Philips. That's what it was. Yeah, this is the one right here. Philips launches a 43-inch HDR monitor that reaches 1,000 nits of brightness. Oh, it's $1,000? That's not so bad.
You could use that as like a spotlight or a fill light.
Well, who needs stuff that bright?
Well, if you are working with HDR, having that amount of brightness is really handy. Like if we had one of these monitors, we could actually do HDR color correction on any of the 4K footage that we're shooting. So if you're producing a film, let's say that's going to go to 4K Blu-ray and HDR, you're going to need a monitor like that to actually see what you're doing to the footage to make sure it looks good. Or you're going to get one of these crazy expensive $18,000 monitors that has high dynamic range on it.
I mean, it's only $1,000.
Yeah, that's really not terrible.
It's chump change, right?
Honestly, it's not. For a 43-inch 4K monitor with 1,000 nits of brightness and HDR, that's pretty cheap, dude.
Get one now.
It's not bad.
I mean, it'd be fun just to put that on your television. I mean, just for fun.
I mean, some of the like color reference monitors that David's talking about from like Atmos are literally 20 grand, and they're like 20-inch monitors, but they're super duper, I guess, technically perfect or whatever. Perfect color.
It's film tax.
Film tax. Okay,
You
so
know you're gonna do some expensive shit with this, so here, have an expensive monitor.
exactly. Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Seems like we've got a problem with cranking the saturation up that much. Look at the houses; they look blue, man.
They look ridiculous, don't they?
Where's the shot from? Do you know?
This shot, I have no idea. This is just some stock footage I pulled down when I created this assignment several years ago.
Vacation?
What was that?
Wasn't from the Disney vacation?
No, it's not from the Disney vacation. I didn't shoot any video on my Disney vacation. Like, I don't want to go home and cut
Right.
vacation
You got your
footage.
phone, though, right?
Screw
Maybe
that.
your phone?
No.
No, not even. You got Snapchat and
Nope.
stuff, man.
I shot no video on my vacation. Okay, let's color correct this footage. All right, so it needs some saturation, obviously. So let's go in and add a little bit of saturation into this thing. We want it to look good, but we don't want it to look cartoony.
Todd, what about the LUTs? What's that all about, man?
So LUTs are lookup tables, right? So lookup tables are usually for cameras, and you can create your own LUTs too. Like you can create looks in the field and save your LUTs, and then take those LUTs and pull them into, say, After Effects and Lumetri, and use them for grading all the footage inside of After Effects with a specific LUT. So if we go and we look at these LUTs, there's some LUTs in here for specific cameras, like the ARRI LUTs. Phantom LUT if you're shooting with a Phantom camera, ARRI Alexa. There's not much, unfortunately. Like, where's the GH5 LUT? Where's the Canon 5D Mark V LUT? Where's the Canon 1DC LUT? Where's the A7S LUT?
Right. What about creative at Look? You see Look, Todd? Are those more LUTs? It says none. Click on none.
Oh, looks. These are looks to like represent the look of specific film stocks, right? So like all these film stocks up here are like Fuji D250D 3510. If we click that, it's going to give it that kind of old-timey film look, right? I'm going to pull out some of this crap.
Is
Just
that a LUT though?
no, it's not really a LUT. It's like a pre-built color grade, basically.
Oh, okay.
Let's just play with some of these. I'm kind of interested to see what they look like. All right. The monochrome ones I'm interested in, just to see how far they push the footage.
I bet my LUT's way better than your LUT, dude.
My LUT's better than your LUT. That one's kind of interesting.
Dude, that's like color grading trash talk right there. My LUT's so much better.
These are interesting. I don't play with these very often.
Cinespace, look at that. Whoa.
Fuji Eterna 250 3510 is my favorite one so far.
There you go.
Whoa!
Look at that.
You better have flat footage if you're going to use that one.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
All right, so moving forward, let's rock through this so we can get you guys onto other things. All right. Okay, so we've got the footage. It obviously needs some saturation, so I'm going to go ahead and put some saturation into this thing. I don't want it to look too cartoony. A little bit of saturation. I'm going to go ahead and... Here's the basic corrections. Tone. There's the tone. All right. I'm going to go ahead and push the blacks down just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring the highlights up a little bit, stylizing this a little bit, maybe add a little bit of contrast just for fun. Alright, so right away it's pretty easy to get a decent looking piece of footage out of your flat or flattish stuff that you're shooting. So that's pretty simple. I'm going to go with that, and then we're going to do a few color overlays just to boost a few areas, or we can try some other fun stuff too. Let's try some other fun stuff. I'm going to set my my palette layout back to the default settings, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to play with some other color correction stuff in here. So I have to look here and see what we got. All right, so some of them are kind of fun to play with. If you go into the, just open up, so like delete any selection that you have in effects and presets and then go into color correction, you can see all of the different plugins that they have for color correction. I like to play with change color or change to color, so I'm going to drop change color on here, and I'm going to pick this kind of turquoise that we got going on the ocean. And I'm going to look at the color correction mask. So one of the kind of cool things about change color is you can change specific colors. You can grab like the blues or reds or certain colors, and you can push them and leave everything else alone, which is kind of nice. So right now I'm looking at the mask that it's creating. So this is a lot like, it's basically like taking a Luma matte that we've played with before, and it's adding a Luma matte and controlling certain areas of the image depending on what color you've selected. So I'm going to come in here and kind of decrease the matching tolerance a little bit, turn up the matching softness a little bit, and it's really selecting a lot of the image. Like, I really don't want that much of it. Ooh, wow, that's even worse. Oh, chroma. Yeah, no. Now, some of these work well and some of them don't work so well. I'm a little underwhelmed with how well change color works. I was hoping that it would just select the ocean.
So if you
Is the only way to do that just to have like duplicate layers or whatever? Like,
Or
'cause I don't.
composite.
Like, how do you?
So give me an instance of what you'd want to do, David.
So like, if, for example, like you want to just do like around the beach, like you don't want it to be choosing the land area when you chose the.
Like, so you basically would want to mask this off right here.
Yeah.
Just do the sand part of the beach.
Yeah, you want only to change color to affect the ocean, not any land, basically.
Right, I totally get where you're coming from. Yep, that's what I was going to try to play with change color for, is just kind of select the turquoise and see if I could just get it to affect the beach. But there is a lot of turquoise playing in all these houses over here.
So you can't just
So
use
it's
the pen tool?
you can use the pen tool. That's what I was going to go ahead and do next. The fortunate thing is we used to have to do that frame by frame, but now I think what we'll be able to do is kind of create a mask and then have it animate over time just by using the, the tracking mask feature, which will be really nice. So let's see how that works. So I'm actually kind of interested in what you said about just selecting the sand. I'm going to see if I can just do that and play with the sand itself. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, duplicating number 4. I'm going to call this sand. I'm going to call the other one shot to base. And I'm going to just try to select the sand and see if we can make the tracker tool do all that work for us. So I'll start at the beginning at 0. I'm going to create a nice mask, kind of roughly around the beach. Right down by the beach.
So that, you pretty much don't have to do this then for every single, like, every effect that you want to mask, you have to create a new layer then, right? Like, so right now, you want to do
Right.
color to it, but if you wanted to use a different effect, there'd be an additional layer.
That is correct. Yep, you would add layers.
Oh, bummer.
So I think Premiere has something where you can, like, most effects, there's a pen tool right next to it, so you can just, I don't
You
know
can
why After Effects doesn't
you
have
can
that.
do the effect just on you
Yeah.
can just mask it. Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of how DaVinci works too. Is that you can mask certain areas and then it just controls the mask section of the area. So is After Effects the best color corrector? No.
Is Premiere better? Yes.
No.
Is Premiere better? No. I would if I was working, and I have I graded all of that zombie movie that I worked on post on. I did all of the color grading inside of After Effects because number one, I didn't have the time to learn a brand new color corrector to do it, and I was super familiar with After Effects and could work really quickly. So I really liked it. I could work very very fast. And all I really did was I just worked it in scenes, right? So I took the original edit, condensed it all down so that I didn't have a bunch of shots all over the place, and I just worked scene by scene. And I brought the scenes in using dynamic linking, and I went in and did all of my color grading work shot by shot. And if I was working, say, on shots in the same situation that I had already done a grade on, I would just take all the effects that I applied that grade with, copy, paste to the next shot, or go select all the shots of that specific grade, paste them all on, and it works really well, especially if you're really comfortable in After Effects. I will admit that I should learn DaVinci because I know it is a very powerful tool. It works really, really, really well. So I would suggest to all of you out there, if you can, get yourself into some DaVinci Resolve and start practicing with it because it's a really, really powerful tool. Go ahead, Luke. Yep, it is free. Full version's $300,
Is it like
Free if you buy the Blackmagic camera.
importing and exporting?
which I would never do. Yeah, I just said that, Blackmagic. So if you're watching this tutorial, you heard me. Okay, so let's see how well After Effects will follow that beach. What do you think, David? You think we're going to have any success here whatsoever?
Probably not. I don't know. No idea.
Let's see. So I'm going to have it track position, scale, rotation. I'm going to go ahead and have it do skew too, and we'll just see what happens. So far, so good.
Don't jinx it. Take it in a mocha. Just get it.
Honestly, that would be better. It's doing a pretty good job.
Yeah. Whoa.
All right, so I'm going to help it out just a little bit. Move this node out just a hair. Keep on cruising. Okay, and I'm just going to start helping this out a little bit. I'm actually surprised it's working as well as it is. So the other thing that I'm going to do here, David, is I'm going to probably soften this too. I'm not going to make it a hard selection. Just so I can kind of keep the color where I want it. And I'm not going to lie, I would honestly probably do this by hand. Or in Mocha. Because I think we could get away with probably 5 keyframes on this thing, to be honest. Yeah, you could probably do one here and go like every second or every second and a half and do like 5, 6 keyframes max and be done. And it will be better than what you get from the tracker. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and feather this out by like 30 pixels, and we'll go ahead and adjust it a little bit, maybe make the sand a little more brown. So we got our Lumetri color in there. Let's go ahead and reset everything. Pull the shadows down a little bit. Push the saturations a little bit. Maybe drop the exposure a little. That didn't work too bad. Let's check it out and see what it looks like. Not bad. Yeah, you can see where it skips around though. Boo. Yeah, I would probably just do that like this. Back to the beginning. Back to the beginning. Mask. Delete that. We'll do a keyframe here. We'll go out a couple seconds and adjust. It's pretty good. Go maybe another second and a half or so. Adjust again. Go again out to 5, 510, somewhere around there. Adjust again. It's actually not ended. It doesn't end until like the end of the year or something like that. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, okay. I was about to literally a
Well, at
step,
least
right?
there's no nuclear testing anymore.
We don't know.
That's not necessarily the case either. All right. We're gonna focus on After Effects and not geopolitics.
Joe, I'm on your side. Politics, this is just about, Americans and Koreans united once and for all.
That would be geopolitics. Well, like ending the Korean War is all well and good and everything, but I want to know if they're going to stop dumping feces on their crops. Do you know that 90% of North Koreans have parasites because they use human feces to fertilize their crops?
It's not the only country.
Yeah, and it's not the only country.
Germany is well known for it.
It's just like ridiculous.
Cultural difference.
Sweden imports garbage so they can recycle it.
But they use that, but they don't use, they use that for fuel. Like,
That's better.
To, yeah, fertilize the,
All right, so
not for,
again, we'll focus on After Effects instead of geopolitics. Okay, so we got a nice mask made around the beach. You guys kind of are getting the hang of this stuff. I would probably go ahead and do a color overlay if I wanted to do the ocean again, just to like pop the turquoise there a little bit more or change that color a little bit. This is basically the gist, right?
That's right. This is simple stuff, man.
So does anybody have any other questions color correction wise? Okay, cool. Nothing anybody wants to see. Okay, cool.
Okay, one thing, Todd.
Go ahead, Luke.
Can color grading just be as simple as just boosting the saturation on something? Is that color grading? Because I thought color grading was a specific color you put over something.
Well, it can be. I mean, that's using the term kind of loosely. I mean, color grading is more of like deciding on a look that benefits your story or your footage and makes it do a certain thing like emotionally for the tone of your project, right? Color grading could be called, oh yeah, I'm just going to add a little saturation to this and call it good. I would call that more of a color correction than a color grade. A color grade is adding a look to it, right? So it could be like what you were saying about Lumetri. Like we could come in here and we could say, let's give this a look. Bing! It's color graded. Done. Finished. Fine. If that, like I said, this is an objective thing. So it's all dependent on your story, how you want your footage to look. I mean, the biggest thing for me in terms of like when you're working on narrative projects or short films or whatever is you want your stuff to be consistent, right? You want shots to not take the person out of the story. So if one shot is totally different than the next shot, people are going to go, well, that's not supposed to look like that, and then they're not paying attention to your story anymore. So color correction and color grading are all in an effort to boost the effectiveness of the media's story on the person watching it. We're good to go. That's lecture for the night. Save it. So here's what I would suggest. The suggestion is knock this assignment out tonight so you guys don't have any homework over the course of the week. That's just a suggestion. It's loose. I will be here until all of you are gone. So if you want help with any projects that you're maybe behind on or want help with anything else, I'm happy to do so. Make sure that you turn in both your AEP file and your video file for next week. I've already created a Dropbox so you could stick around for the next hour and a half and knock this assignment out and not have anything to do over the next week. Because I know you all have finals that you need to prep for, right? And our final's pretty much done. So you don't have to worry about that in this class. So it'll be pretty easy peasy from here on out.
for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're not going to have a final. So we're done on May
15.
May 15th.